Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. Registration is now open for the spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA. Starting March 24th, 2026, this 9-month facilitated learning journey is designed for entrepreneurs, activists, artists, community leaders, and others working on the front lines of the next economy. Drawing on over 15 years of experience supporting more than 500 social enterprises, the program explores the limits of business as usual and introduces practical business principles through a regenerative and equity-centered lens, while building the community and connection needed to stay grounded, inspired, and resilient. If you're curious, join us for a free intro session to meet the facilitators and hear directly from alumni about their experience. You can also save 20% on tuition when you register before February 2nd during our early bird period. So learn more at lifteconomy.com/MBA. That's LIFT economy.com/MBA. Thanks for listening, and now on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hello, my name is Erin Axelrod, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy and co-host of the Next Economy Now podcast. And I'm joined today by Dr. Lucía Alcalá, who is a professor of psychology at California State University, Fullerton, specializing in the intersection of cultural values and children's cognitive and social development. She earned her doctoral degree from the University of California, Santa Cruz in 2014. And her cross-cultural research challenges deficit perspectives by highlighting the sophisticated knowledge and cultural strengths of Indigenous communities, particularly through children's contributions to family work and community ceremonies. Dr. Alcalá has been recognized with multiple awards, including the Fulbright U.S. Scholar Fellowship. Her research findings have gained widespread attention, featured in media outlets such as NPR, podcasts, and The Atlantic. Dr. Alcalá, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am so thrilled to have you, and I wanted to just share with the listeners a little bit about the why I invited you onto a economics podcast, because what your work really has taught me as I've been learning from what you write about and what you study is the ways in which children are woven into the fabric of family life impacts and has implications for nothing short than the whole of our economy. So that is why I'm excited to get into this conversation. And yeah, I'll pass it to you, and just what thoughts right off the top do you have about that to bring our listeners into this conversation?
Well, thank you for having me. And one of the things that comes up to mind is how we think about children, right? Children a couple of centuries ago, they were assets to our families, right? With farm families, the more children you had, the more kind of labor you had, and they have now turned to a liability. They're expensive, and childcare and all the things that we have to provide, we have to in quotes, because a lot of it is also the capitalist society in which we live. So I think taking a historical perspective of children and how we conceptualize children and their role in the family, how that has changed, I think can give us some ideas of the economical impact that they have in their family.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I imagine many of our listeners are in that position where, you know, they may have not anticipated the intensity of the economic pressures that came with having children, not as an inherent or innate result of children per se, but as a product of systems where our culture silos children's away from work, away from home care. So maybe you could just share a little bit with our listeners. What is the research that you've done for your esteemed career, and maybe bring us into a few of the stories and research questions that you've been fascinated by?
Thank you. So I want to take a step back and just share that I grew up in Mexico, in the southern part of Mexico, in a small rural town. I came to the States when I was 15. I was already a grown person, an independent adult, kind of. And what I became really interested was in trying to figure out the way I grew up and the way that I was witnessing children being raised in a predominantly white middle-class community in Southern California. So that sparked my interest. And you mentioned very kindly that how we have siloed children into child-focused activities that are managed and created by adults for children's consumption. And so that brings us an idea of how we are providing these activities that limit the wide range of skills that they could develop, like autonomy, initiative, agency, right? So I remember growing up and always doing something, and always in the company of other people, other children, other adults. There was no clear separation of things that were just for children, things that were just for adults. And I think in middle class communities, we have done that clear separation. I remember one of the things that children were allowed to do was during funerals, helping pass coffee or hot drinks during the wake, carrying flowers during the funeral. And nothing really was hidden from children. Maybe when somebody was being born or dying or other things like that. But we had access to all the activities that were being done, but also we were exposed to the views and values. For example, I remember sitting in a funeral of a 3-year-old girl that had passed away and hearing the ideas about life after death. Is there life? All these other values and kind of philosophical questions that we have encountered. And so I think that with the change in the economy, trying to protect children, which I agree in terms of child labor and putting them in hazardous ways. And I think that was the intent, to protect them, but we have gone a little far on that to protect them from anything that actually could be a productive and developmentally appropriate task for them to do.
Absolutely. So you've actually, through your experience noticing those distinctions, you've then said, okay, from an academic perspective, let me set up some investigations, inquiries, and let me actually go to communities where they're finding a better balance. And you've done this research.
Yes. And I also have to provide another disclaimer. When I was in grad school, I was a mom already. I had children and I had my third child. And as I had my children, and I was, again, participating in like mommy and me groups with my toddler and seeing the other moms, how they were interacting with them. And then also getting kind of pushback from my mom in how I was not raising my children the correct way. So I found myself in between these two ways of being a parent. And I was like, okay, there must be something else. And am I doing it right? And maybe new parents feel this way because we're parenting our children in a different time and context than the way and the time that our parents were raising us. And we have to prepare them for an economy that is changing constantly and that we have a lot of questions about and concerns. So we have to be mindful of that. So I was very selfishly interested in what are other parents doing. And so after the PhD, we moved to Mexico and we lived in the communities for 2 years. And I was able to see how this unfolds in a different way.
Oh, amazing story. I'm so glad that your personal curiosity propelled you in this direction. It's part of why I have a 2-year-old at home, and my personal curiosity is part of what drove me to reach out to you and see if you'd be willing to come and share your knowledge and your expertise. And I'm so glad I did. We're going to learn so much from this conversation. Gosh, what's coming up for me, I have all these questions, but what's coming up for me is how do you grapple with sort of the appropriateness dialogue? You mentioned your mom kind of sharing her views on parenting and to you, but where does that come from, and how do you hold that? Is that a stressor for parents? And
for me, it was a stressor, and especially for my mom. I'm the first-gen college student, first one to pursue higher education and graduate studies. And so for my mom, it was a terrible decision for me to go to grad school and take my kids with me and put them through this stressful situation. So it's been a question that I've always grappled, but I think I've been able to show her, and I've been able to communicate to her and other moms that I work with, that there is no one way. There's not just one way of parenting children. In fact, you cannot just parent. If you have two, I have three children, have more than one. What they need is different, and their needs change as they grow and develop. So it's part of having this ownership and understanding that this is new, right? As your child goes in from toddlerhood to middle childhood, it's a new encounter, and you need to prepare for that. And you think you understand. I think for me, having kind of like a framework where I need to be mindful of where I am and where the child is, and how can we work together to support them in the skills and abilities that they need to develop or that they're developing.
So you mentioned those at the top, these developmental skills that are kind of opportunities that we're missing when we separate kids from our lives. I'd love to talk more about that. And you talk about like fluid collaboration in the context of working together with children. Yeah, talk more about like these developmental skills and the opportunities and how we can weave our lives together in a way that benefits both the parents and the children.
Yeah, so collaboration is a skill that has to be endeared as one of the 21st century skills that we need. We see this, for example, I teach undergraduate and graduate students, and whenever they have to do a group project, it's difficult for them to collaborate. So when children are integrated early on into the fabric, you mentioned the fabric of the family and the complex fabric, social fabric of the community, they start to have opportunities to observe others working together. So moms in a lot of the Indigenous communities and the communities that I've worked with, they make a point to make sure that the toddler, the infant, has access to observing others. I did a study with my colleague, Dr. Maria Dolores Cervera, and we asked the moms, at what age can the child start helping or start learning to help? And I was so surprised by their responses. One of the moms said, as early as they can sit by themselves, which is around 6-7 months of age. And she said, if you're working on something, you sit them next to you, and that's how they learn. Or they can say as soon as they can walk, around the age of 1. They know that they're not making substantial contributions, but they said, you can ask them, put your shoes away, or can you bring me this thing? And they already are developing this sense of purpose and agency. And so they understand that, of course, they might drop something, they might make mistakes, but they know that this is the only way they can learn, right? And it's important for them for the child to feel respected, for their autonomy to be respected. And they will respect the child's autonomy, even if they don't necessarily agree with their actions. So as kids early on are embedded, they rarely spend time by themselves the way children are segregated in middle-class communities into their own room, into like child-only activities. So they always have access to observing others and be attentive to what's going on in the environment. So they have great attention skills. And this is how they learn to collaborate. I remember when I was there, I think it was the second year, we worked with some children, elementary school children, on a project that they decided on. So this is through participatory action research, where the participants also are part of the research process. And so they decided that one of the things they wanted to do was repair the swing set that they had in the playground. And so these were like 5th graders and 6th graders. So with the whole thing, so it included math and other things, measuring the materials that we needed. So the day that we got all the materials came and we started working, and I haven't been able to articulate this experience, but the best way I can think of it is, the idea of flow, when you're a collective flow. we were working together. We were repairing the swings. We were painting them. You can see the kids. It was about 6 kids, my colleague and my husband helping us. And there was you could see the whole group working together. You couldn't see who was doing more than the other one. There might be some ways in which one was leading and another child was supporting that. At some point, we noticed that we were not advancing because we needed more tools. And so a child said, "Oh, I have an extra hammer at home." So he went to get the hammer. Somebody took over what he was doing, and we just kept going. And this is in the patio. This is I think it was probably like March. Humid, hot weather, arduous work, but we were all into it. And that was the most beautiful collaborative skill and activity that I have experienced. And they learned this from, being one and being part of this group and contributing and collaborating. And I think you had a question, or you might have a question about motivation, intrinsic motivation. The motivation comes from them, from feeling capable of doing the things, right? Of contributing and seeing how that may benefit others.
So talk about what you've observed, because you came back from Mexico. You live in Southern California now. What have you observed so that people can be aware of what not to do in terms of our culture undermining intrinsic motivation? I think this is a really important piece. And obviously we're holding a lot of self-compassion and compassionate space when we talk about this, because we don't want anybody to come away from this podcast feeling like, oh my God, I've done everything wrong. These are like systems of, systemic proportion that are contributing to this. But I think it's really helpful for folks to have an awareness of how this culture undermines intrinsic motivation. What would you have to say on that?
I think that, yes, and parents, please don't feel like judge or you're doing an amazing job. I know that this is a society that has pressure us constantly to do more, to make more money, to do more things, to put our kids in all these other activities that will develop skills that are valuable, yes. But also it's a lot of pressure for parents, and then, I don't know, almost becomes a competition. So when we have this systems put in place for children to march through a packed schedule. And I know this from a study that we're currently analyzing the data where we ask parents about children's free time. And so middle-class children and parents in Southern California report that children have about 30 minutes sometimes because they're going from one activity to the next. So 30 minutes to be spontaneous, to exercise their agency. And they're doing other things that are valuable as well. But I think adding more time for them to just be kids and be spontaneous and do these things. The other part is that we tend to see parents and then children as separate. So parents are the ones in charge, and then children are the ones that basically, doing the things that we ask them to do. And it creates a contractual relationship. If kids are doing chores often, sometimes they have allowances, or if they don't do the chores, they can't access another privilege like TV or other things. So it becomes contractual versus what I see in the Yucatán Maya community specifically, children helping at home and viewing that as a shared responsibility. There's no need to pay them. There's no need for anybody to supervise them. And when I have asked children why they help at home, you can tell that it was the wrong question, because they gave me this look like, what do you mean why I help at home? Why do I help with chores? Some kids said, well, I live there, or, I also eat. So I just help. But there were some other kids that also said, it's just part of being the family. And so that sense of belonging to a group is very different than this contractual relationship that we often see in middle-class families. How can we go from being a contractual to being this more relational, kind of horizontal way of organizing the family activities? Is acknowledging children's contribution, saying, yeah, so you're folding the laundry for the family. I appreciate it. And highlighting the skills that they're learning. Oh, you're doing really well. Because at the end of the day, we want them to be competent, independent adults, right?
Beautifully said. And I know all of this is, you mentioned overcorrection towards like the siloization of kids and adults. There could be an overcorrection of acknowledgement too, which we see in middle class culture of like overpraise, which also challenges, intrinsic motivation. But I love what you're saying around like acknowledgement it's a way that they're learning when they do something that's contributing to the shared household.
And praise, going back to praise, I think I want to make sure that we don't misunderstand that. If the kids feel acknowledged in general and they see their contributions being beneficial to the group, that in itself will be what's going to support their intrinsic motivation. So the external praise is not going to be as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's so clear. And you've written a lot about this and others too around, just finding a balance. And one thing I wanted to bring in that you mentioned when you described this was when we talk about our Next Economy MBA program, we talk about different zones of transaction. We talk about gift economy as one way of meeting our needs. We talk about barter as another way of meeting our needs. And then, of course, financial currency as a third kind of realm. And when you were describing the kids in Mexico's response to your question, I thought, as opposed to like a contractual relationship, which would be like more of a barter or a financialized relationship, they're living in the gift economy.
Yeah. It's more of that gift economy, but it's reciprocity, I think, is key here, right? So, and not necessarily the immediate reciprocity. So how can their actions and their work benefit others? And at the end, they're also benefit from it if they are able to maintain balance and good social relationships with the family and the community. In one study that I really enjoyed working on children's knowledge about medicinal plants. So I was just interested, like the scientific kind of purpose of that, how they learn about this. Of course, they learn by observing their grandma or parents preparing the herbs or the different plants to cure different illness. But one of the things that I was not expecting is that the majority of them mentioned, like, once you learn how to use this plant, then if you see somebody that is sick and eats it, then you have this knowledge gives you a social responsibility. And now you're able to do something for someone else too. And this is beyond the family. And so learning is not just for the purpose of learning and developing skills, is that what can I do for others? And so the reciprocity is really what the thread that keeps a lot of these communities that have been self-sustaining communities that were forced into this paid labor economy where they are. Like I see this in the Yucatán Peninsula with all the tourism and how the Mayan communities and people have been forced to go out of their communities and work in the tourist industry because now they're not, and also climate changes, right? Now the production of food in the milpa and the traditional agricultural practices they had is not enough to sustain their families. So they've been forced, but for the longest time, they were self-sustaining and there's this a book by Magdo Everson who talks about how everything they needed, it was in the jungle and in the natural resources that were available. 40 years ago, 30 years ago, there were no plastic items there. Everything was self-sustaining, using natural resources in a way that is respectful also of the environment. I might have gone a little over to a different topic with my answer.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That context setting is core to what we're talking about, right? Because ultimately what you've painted, that I don't even know if people have this in their imagination of what's possible, but what you've painted is for our listeners to imagine a way of being with children that fosters a desire to share knowledge and support community members and jump in when there's a need. I mean, it's so important for folks to imagine that is possible right now.
Yeah, and I think the context has a lot to do. For example, in one of the communities where I worked, preschool children can't walk themselves home, right? It's a small community. It's safe. They don't have cars and everybody knows everyone. And so I remember waiting for our taxi with one of my colleagues, Dr. Data Jimenez Balam, after we had done our work at the elementary school. And the preschool was next to the elementary school. And so it was noonish and the kids were being released from school. And so moms went to pick up the kids to walk home. But I see a few that are walking. And then I see neighbors that are like saying hi to the kid. And so everybody's kind of taking care of, really, the village is supporting the development of the children and allowing them. They have an entire community as a playground in a way. And so seeing this 3-4-year-old, they seem very mature, very intentional, and walking home, after their day at the preschool.
Are there aspects, knowing what you've learned, are there design elements that you've tried to implement at your home in Southern California to build some of that support network for you to be able to create some of those elements of culture?
That is a great question. And unfortunately, no, because, and again, it's contextual, right? The community, you need to have enough people that have those shared values so they can come up with this. I know that in some places, I know when I was in Santa Cruz, parents had like co-ops where they will cook for the families, or they will share childcare, or they will do things. And I think it works in those ways. So if you have children around the same age, where you can provide and share resources and create this sense of community, I think this is one great to do it. I know one of my colleagues here, they had children around the same age with other families. They had like 5 or 6 families where each family will cook a meal one day. So you only have to, think about cooking one day, and then they distribute the meals to the families. It requires a lot more time and intentionality and having, people willing to do this thing with you. I try with my children. I think that they are able to have also because they grew up, in the community for a few years, this strong sense of social responsibility, this strong sense of contributing and knowing when somebody needs help, that there's not even a question whether, it's going to cost you something or not. You have to help and being attentive to the needs of others. And so we know what to do that. So now they're adults, but I think that it needs more than just one individual doing this thing. The one thing, it's not a framework, and I know other researchers have view this as the indigenous kind of parenting practices and how can we implement it. And it's more than that, because I think we need to take a step back and really view current parenting practices and question, where are those practices coming from? And one of the things I have learned and still learning with the Yucatán Maya community is their understanding of personhood. What does it mean to be a person? How do children develop to become a person, meaning a competent, contributing member of the community? How do we conceptualize work, even chores at home? Is it something that have to be avoided? Is it often used as punishment for children? Versus it's the way work is what makes us, it's dignifying. My colleague Rafael Cardoso talked about this in the Oaxaqueño Mije community in Mexico, where in the indigenous language, in their Mije language, there's no way you can describe learning without talking about work and action. So it's embedded in the worldview of what it means to be part of this group, what it means to be a person in this community. And I think going back to children being now liabilities, children being, we have to take care of them. We need to provide for them versus what can children also do? They're capable of doing a lot of things, and children will rise to our expectations.
I love this. This is such a multidimensional space we're in right now in this conversation. It's like holding that this is not just about parenting. This is about culture.
Our society, yes.
And you just said that children will rise to our expectations. So there is agency as a parent in setting the expectations that we want to see our children's rise to.
And I hear this from parents over and over. We're almost done coding some interviews for a new study. And these are parents of 5 to 7-year-old children, and we ask them about, are they capable of doing certain things? And they'll say, oh, no, they're too young. And then parents in Yucatan will say, oh, yeah, they can do this, this, and that. And so it's, and then one of the questions that we ask them with the scenario vignette that we provide of whether children are capable of noticing when somebody needs help. And they're like, oh, no, 5, 7, they don't even have their brain development. They shouldn't be able to pay attention. And no, they know. And then you can take my parents and say, yeah, they should notice when somebody needs help. And if the rest of the family is working, they should go and join. You shouldn't have to ask them. There's no merit in helping someone that has asked you to help. You need to be kind of a step ahead.
I wonder what that cultural norm of undermining children's capabilities, what does that serve in business as usual, late stage capitalism? Well, they're going to grow up to be consumers and workers and not leaders and thinkers. And it serves the system, right? They're going to learn to follow instructions. So this one study that I'm doing with my colleagues at the University of California, Irvine, where we have this cognitive task that children do. And, children here in Southern California, they might not like the test, but they still do it, they go through it. But because their autonomy and agency is respected so much in Yucatan, when we did the study there, the same task, there's one where children just refuse to do it. They're like, no, I don't want to do this. And you can't force them. And they know this was something completely new they had never seen. And so they can exercise that. And these are 5, 7-year-old children, but they do this even at the age of 2. I've seen that happen. And so what the parents do is when they're younger, they allow their children to experience the consequences of their action in a way that is not dangerous or hurtful or will have long-term consequences. So if they're going out to visit someone and they don't want to put a sweater on, they will never force the sweater on the child. They will go and then the child will be cold and the child will understand that, well, it was their decision to not wear the sweater. I was doing this interview and I was interviewing a mom about a 9-year-old girl about the chores that she did at home. And so the mom listed all the chores that Ansel did. And she also said, and sometimes she will also bathe her younger sister, a 2-year-old. And I was thinking, why sometimes? I asked her, because I was thinking maybe Celeste doesn't want to bathe the baby. And this is why sometimes only sometimes she helps. And the mom was like, well, sometimes the 2-year-old doesn't want to be bathed by the sister. Therefore, so she gave me this example. In Yucatan, it's very customary that after your main meal, which is like around 2 p.m., you can go and visit other people. But you can't go visit others without bathing first. And people bathe like a couple times a day because it's so hot and humid. So Celeste, the 8-year-old, 9-year-old, was helping bathe the younger one because they were going to go visit their grandma. But the little girl refused. And the mom said, if you don't bathe, you know that you're not going to be able to go visit grandma. So she still refused, and they couldn't force her, of course. So the other girls got ready, and they were leaving to go visit grandma, and the 2-year-old started crying because she wanted to go. And the mom said, no, you decided not to allow, Celeste to bathe you. You can go visit them. And she cried, of course. But this is a way they can learn their actions and take ownership of their actions.
Oh, you are doing paradigm shifting work. I'm so grateful, so honored to be learning from you. And I think if I didn't ask the elephant in the room, I would miss out on some gems of wisdom. So I'm going to go for it. How have screens transformed? And, what would you say to folks raising kids in a screen-filled environment these days, particularly if those screens have to do with a parent's work, and like how a parent's work is about contribution to the household. And yeah, any thoughts you have on screens, I think would be well received.
Yeah, screens are And I'm dealing with this with my teenager. She's on her phone the whole time. And I see that after the pandemic, all the families, for example, in Yucatán, in the small community that I've done my work, had to have a phone because this was the way the teachers were giving them their homework. So for the first time in kind of history, every family had at least one phone and had access to the internet and had access to screens. I think that might change the way children interact. But if we use screens, the way I see that is not problematic, but it might hinder children's development is when we use screens for entertainment. So if we're doing something, we're cooking and we don't want the child to be interrupting us, and we put them, to watch a show, even if it's an educational show, there's research that shows that impacts, their attention. There's some shows that are better than other ones. But I think when we think about screens and spending that time on screens, that is time they're not spending doing something else. And so they're missing out on other skills that they could be developing. If the parents are, even when we work at home, right, we're in our computers the whole time and we're not available to our children, that is, besides the guilt that you experience, is limited to how can we integrate them. And I know you have a two-year-old little one, right? How can you integrate them into this kind of work? It's difficult. But I think you can have the 2-year-old help with some other things. I know when my daughter was 5, 6, and she was still learning, in elementary school, I will have her help me put my students' papers in alphabetical order. That give her practice to remember the alphabet. And of course, it will take me longer, or I could be doing something while she was helping me with this. And it wasn't necessarily just for efficiency, but it was also for her too. And she liked, helping me with my work. So I don't think I have the best answer in terms of what do we do with screens. Screens definitely are not going away. I think we can find ways that we can't compensate for that. I see, for example, at a restaurant, families that have young children, and one way to keep them occupied is to give them a phone, right? To put a show for them to watch. Now, what the kids are not learning is how to socialize, how to be in this group activity, right? Those are crucial skills that they need to develop. How to regulate their emotions in a public space or with other people or, even at home. And so emotional regulation, it's a key factor and something that I see almost not, I don't want to say natural, but just unfolding in a very supportive way. And, as a 2-year-old, what comes with 2-year-olds? Terrible twos. Which again, it's something that is an artifact of middle-class Western societies. Not every 2-year-old around the world, experiences the terrible twos.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. I'd love to hear.
I haven't done a lot of research with younger children, but I have witnessed this, right? And I have seen how a 2-year-old, you can send a 2, 3-year-old to the store to buy something, right? And even the way they carry themselves doing this task, this job that they have been trusted to do, it's so beautiful and, so intentional. But the research by one of my good colleagues, we did work together in Yucatán, Dr. Dia Jimenez Balamba, I mentioned her already. We did also the medicinal plant study. She looked at how parents socialize children around emotions. And what I think is so beautiful about her work and crucial that it is giving us a different perspective is that for Yucatec Maya mothers, children's emotions are a source of information. And so when the child is angry and is throwing a tantrum, right? It's not that they're trying to be annoying to the parent. It's not that they're trying to, the parent is mindful to pay attention to what caused this child anger. And the Yucatec Maya model for health and emotions is to maintain balance. And so when you're angry or sad, there's unbalance in your emotions. And this unbalance can hinder social relationships. And so it's not, children are not socialized to not experience anger, but younger children, toddlers, they're allowed to express that anger, and then parents learn about it. And then they grow to be regulated in their emotions. Same with, joy and happiness. This is an emotion that helps maintain the balance in the community. So we get stressed out and say, we're rushing, we're busy. So these other elements are not helping our parents here in middle class Western, communities. And then the child is, angry. They don't want to put their shoes on. You have to go. It's running late. The emotions are escalating for both, right? Instead of, taking a step back. So what I want to acknowledge is that parents in the industrialized Western middle class communities, they have a lot going on, and they have all these pressures that maybe don't give us the space to really sit in and consider children's emotions in this way as a source of information, as a way to allow them to express their emotions and learn to regulate their emotions so they can be, have this emotional intelligence that I see in children, and now that we value in the research area in psychology.
Beautifully said. And also, because I'm an economist, I'm always thinking about, well, what are the potential implications if we take these actionable steps that you're elucidating seriously? It's like going back to something you mentioned earlier. If we actually recognize that more free time for kids can be a benefit to them to develop intrinsic motivation and just help them learn how to regulate their emotions, there can be a big benefit economically for the family too, to have less costs of activities or buying dinners out or things like this. So rather than thinking about it as having to do more in some way as parents, it's almost like less is more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would suggest that having unstructured time for children where they can, again, exercise their agency, where they can plan and do this. And children that have more unplanned, unstructured time tend to also have better executive function skills. When we think about executive function skills in terms of working memory, attention, and cognitive flexibility. And that's going to have an impact in terms. One of the things that we need to teach our children is to learn how to learn, right? To be independent learners, because the economy is going to shift and it's going to continue to shift. And how we adapt to those changes, how quickly can we learn and to adapt to those changes and be flexible and come up with more creative ways of solving problems. That is key, right? You can involve your children in, meal planning or doing groceries, or, you're socializing them in the economy of the family, but also it helping you plan and have their input as you consider your week. What do you have going on this week? And what are the activities that they want to do instead of the parents choosing them? What are if they want to do sports, if they want to do, music, whatever that might be, have their input as well considered in the process.
Dr. Alcalá, you should do a TED Talk. Oh my gosh. I am so inspired. I am so blown away. I want to have you back on the podcast again.
Thank you. Much. I'm writing a book, so.
Yes. When is your book going to be out?
Oh my God. Not until next year, the end of next year. But I just got my proposal approved by the publisher, so let's get in there.
Fall, winter 2026 book. So grateful that you're taking that on. I can't wait to read your book. It's so needed. And before we go, is there anything that our listeners can do to support you?
I had never had this question asked. I have to take a moment to think about it. It's such a great question. I don't know. Well, they could eventually buy my book, right? But I mentioned the TED Talk. Maybe, we can have somebody interested in hosting the TED Talk and do that. I'll be happy to participate. I think what they can do for me is what they can do for themselves too is we're this rush, hectic economy and society that if we can extend some compassion to ourselves and to other people around us, that could be very useful. And for me, something that you can do for me will be something that you do for yourself. And eventually we all benefit from it, right? We're all part of this whole system. And I appreciate that you are interested in this and that we can acknowledge and highlight and center the experiences and the wealth of knowledge and wisdom that Indigenous communities bring. I think we have, through colonialism and settled colonialism, have really damaged these communities, and it's our shared responsibility to bring back some social justice at some point. I don't know, it's a very long, unattainable goal maybe, but just acknowledging that, right? The resiliency and the value of the practice of Indigenous communities, and be open to extend compassion and be mindful of ourselves, where we are. And as they think about their own parenting practices and challenges, know that it's not an individual problem. It's a systemic issue, right? We're in the system that is pushing us to produce, right? And really a challenge to that is to do less, to be more mindful and to be more present, and to do that with our children, I think will be a great way and a great investment for our society.
Well, Dr. Alcalá, I'm so grateful. Once again, I'm really, really grateful you've spent even longer than we had planned on this amazing interview. Is there anything you'd love to say as we bring our conversation to a close? I'm just feeling so much gratitude for you right now.
As I have described throughout our conversation, my work is inherently cross-cultural. For over a decade, I have studied how families from different cultural backgrounds provide different activities for children, reflecting the values and developmental goals that guide children's development. While I've identified clear differences across communities, particularly within Indigenous communities, one universal truth stands out. All parents that I have talked to in my multiple studies, regardless of background, share the same overarching goal. They want their children to be happy and to lead safe, fulfilling lives. The ways parents support their children may differ, the activities they provide for them, the values that they have, but the ultimate aspiration is the same. Every child deserves to be happy, to be safe, to embrace who they are. And this needs to be aligned and centering their own cultural perspectives on developmental priorities, cultural values. And this is a hope that we all share. All kids deserve to be happy, and we need to learn to respect them and to provide what is needed for them to have this happy, fulfilling life. Thank you.
All right. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Thanks once again for being on the show.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the B, hosted by Lyft Economy's Amy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the B is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the B on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.